Professor Schama, you wrote a fascinating piece of commentary in the Financial Times last week, I think titled The Age of Rage. Essentially, or that may have been the opening sentence, essentially your concern, your worry, was looking at the financial crisis and at Greece, at the Tea Party, at the disintegration, the possible disintegration, the tensions in Europe, etc., and comparing that to 1789, to the 30s. Do you really think that we're entering a period of that degree of significance and possibly danger?
Well, I don't want to be a Cassandra, I'm the wrong sex for a start. However, it does seem to me a moment really fraught with a lot of social peril. History, it won't be like the French Revolution. I wanted to do that as an analogy because there was in France, just before the Revolution, the same sense among people who'd been socially disadvantaged, starving peasants, starving artisans, for a long time, that a remote class of people then, they were really called financiers, they were called financiers, were somehow responsible for them having to foot the bill tax-wise. And very often extremely socially incendiary situations come out of misunderstandings. The truth about the French Revolution, and we'll come into the present, I promise you, in a second, was that actually the nobility were just about prepared to remove their own exemptions and privileges and to take on more of the tax burden. But once the sort of Pandora's box had been opened, sort of sense really of almost unfocused but extremely destructive rage was very difficult to control, even by reformers. Now, the situation now, we've seen a bit of violent hostility in the streets of Greece. There was, a terrible thing happened to perfectly ordinary people working in a bank actually lost their lives because of all the rage. We're at a very difficult situation. Why? Because we're moving from Keynesian policy of deficit finance pump priming to the opposite policy, to public sector expenditure reductions of a brutal, stringent kind from Britain to America right through Europe. And it would be those things, cuts in social services, cuts in wages in terms of real income, that are the delayed trigger for a lot of this anger, because the question follows, amidst all these homilies about how we must live within our means, who got us into this shithole that actually forces us really to undergo these terrible stringencies? Answer, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, answer Bear Stearns, answer Lehman Brothers, answer AIG. It wasn't the fault of working stiffs from one end of the world to the other. If that's not a recipe for serious indignation, I don't know what is.
One of the points that you come back to in the article is the need that people have to go through the drama of blaming someone, of finding a scapegoat, of a sacrifice. Right. Your view of democracy, in that article, is that democracy is great. In the UK, we've had an election. Maybe that's going to give us enough of a sense of having punished someone. Yeah. Your fear, it seems to me, is based around the notion that, in the case of Europe, who is there to punish? Yeah. And in the case of the United States, does punishment mean anti-Washington isolationism? Yeah. Do you think that there's a democratic deficit in Europe, and is that going to lead? Is that going to mean that there is no way out for the tensions and the emotions that you analyse?
It's an arbitrary thing, the timing of elections, but as we saw in this country, really, just the incidental issue of getting a political campaign running, the sheer kind of adrenaline rush of wiping the slate clean, the slate never really gets completely clean, but appearing to do that has an extraordinary, it's not a placebo exactly, but it makes people feel civically empowered in some peculiar way, even if they don't end up exactly with what they were expecting, the coalition being a very good case in point. And as I said in the piece, it's possible for the beneficiaries of that election to ride that sort of sense of kind of civic empowerment. So, you know, if it's a tough call, it's a gambler's call. You would say, well, from, you know, Portugal to Lithuania, if you want to really get out of the way of a much fiercer, you know, sort of spray of bullets, call an election, whatever you are, because you don't quite know, as the French Revolution proved, what's going to really turn out to be the result. But the danger is indeed of all sorts of gremlins that we thought we'd long since waved goodbye to. Local chauvinism in Europe being one of them. It's almost impossible not to believe that something we really thought was obsolescent, the rise of rather militant, truculent nationalist movements, won't feed off this particular kind of rage. It's already doing that in the United States.
So one of your themes in your book on the French Revolution in Citizens is exactly the way in which wave after wave of political elite fires up the resentment of the people in the street and then gets brought down
lives
by
to regret it.
Lives to regret it
Yeah.
until you need the strong man.
Yeah.
Is this the pattern that you fear, that in the periphery of Europe there's going to be a huge sentiment against the outsider, against Brussels,
not just
against
in
the
Europe.
IMF?
Yes, I do. I mean, not just in, you know, when you feed into that particular confluence of various kinds of poisons and irrational paranoias, the issue of immigration, the foreigners. I mean, I was aghast to see Obama sending the army down, you know, actually throwing a sop, a little piece of raw meat, to anti-immigrant hysterics. We barely waved goodbye to the president of Mexico when he did that. When you feed that into it, it's very difficult not to see. Again, it's a rash historian, you know, we charge extra for prophecies. But it's difficult to believe that that's not really, unless, you know, somebody up there in international finance land has got some fairy dust which you can kind of sprinkle on the situation. But even that would be the case, providing governments in the current year and, you know, through what's bound to be a kind of rocky summer, stock exchange in great kind of turmoil, bond market biting its nails and toes. Given that's the case, we're in for so much universal deficit hawkery, it's hard to see that there won't be that kind of truculence happening.
One of the figures you mention in your piece is Father Coughlin, someone whom I didn't know about.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. We always think that someone we have an image of our mind, Dorothea Lange's Woman on the Highway, that FDR and the New Deal really soaked up exactly the distress and alienation and anomie of that. But not enough. There was the sense also that somehow people had been victimized by some sort of international conspiracy, quite probably Jewish. And Father Coughlin was two things. He was a genuine pastoral, charismatic, demagogic Catholic priest, so he could pull out that kind of holy pastoral card, and he hated Jews. You know, so he really, again, fed into the notion that someone else out there, some international set of villains, had actually been responsible for tide of unemployment that refused to abate as fast as Franklin Roosevelt said it would. But he was, above all, an extraordinary manipulator of the airwaves. And the present administration in Washington is still too lofty, still too nose-holding. It's dying of its own fastidiousness. It actually so condescends about the radio and television demagogues that it's in danger of committing political suicide from its own philosophical grandeur.
And the shock-jocks are with us still.
And how? And they know how to do it even more ferociously than used to be the case.